Watch this. I've taught Acti a trick. Acti, light it up. Fetch! He's as clumsy as he is stupid.
We gotta get back to the past, to the 20th century. Digging through the bubble wrap into your memories. Magnus the collector, he's protecting what we find. Relentless heavy rhythms keep us safe through time. RetroBlasting.
This is not a toy.
Just the corners of your mind. RetroBlasting. The stuff you love since you were 9. We're blasting into the past to see what thrills still last. RetroBlasting.
The entire reason Kenner Toys made Star Wars figures 3 3/4 inches tall in 1978 was directly related to their need to fit the figures in vehicles. Star Wars was just as much about vehicles as it was about characters in Kenner's mind, and if they'd stuck with the 12-inch tall action figure, they'd never be able to sell a Millennium Falcon that was 5 feet wide. After Hasbro relaunched Star Wars toys in 1995, the vehicles produced were initially re-releases of the vintage ships, but they soon branched out and expanded the fleet with vehicles we never got in the vintage series, such as the TIE Bomber, the T-16 Skyhopper, and a completely redesigned Darth Vader TIE Fighter. It was clear from the beginning of the relaunched line that Hasbro had little to no interest in playsets, but complaints were few because the vehicle lineup was so impressive. These days, Hasbro has all but abandoned vehicles as well. And when they do get around to making vehicles, they're always terminally overpriced, wincingly undersized, and too few. The Rogue One line has exactly 3 vehicles to choose from. Seth Hastings at Plastic Galaxy sent me the Ewing Fighter in the mystery box. It's the main transport for the characters in the first half of the movie, but immediately you can see there's a problem with the scale. The Ewing Fighter is way too small. In the film, the vehicle is not literally a fighter. Rather, it's more of a troop dropship, sort of the Star Wars equivalent of a Black Hawk helicopter. But this toy is downsized considerably and only holds 1 figure via a chintzy elastic strap when it should be a cockpit for 2. The underbelly where the troops should go, while already far too small, is home to a recessed Nerf dart cannon rather than any area for figures. Yes, the ship looks nice as a model, and the wing swing feature is well engineered. But the toy is too small and flimsy for a vehicle that was in essence the Millennium Falcon of this movie. The vintage Falcon was a great people mover for us as kids, and it's a shame that Rogue One, which is all about a team of commandos, doesn't have a vehicle that carries them all. Given that Hasbro is only making 3 vehicles for this line, there's no excuse for making this toy so pointless, especially when LEGO is able to realize the ship exactly as it was shown. I can't overemphasize how undersized the vehicle is. It isn't much larger than the TIE Striker, but at least the TIE Striker is pretty much the right size for the TIE Fighter toys we've been familiar with since 1978. While it looks like a good and plenty with half a TIE Interceptor's wings, it's a sturdy little vehicle. The cockpit is adequate with a rugged canopy. The wings are a bit floppy, and the Striker has a useless swing lift feature, operated by awkwardly folding the wings up one at a time. There's no single button activation like the vintage X-Wing. The film itself lacks an iconic visual of the TIE Strikers moving their wings into attack position. So unlike the shot of the X-Wings locking their S-foils that we loved in the original film, this feature on the TIE Striker is devoid of that familiarity, and the release lever serves only to smash your fingers if you're not careful. Ow. The TIE Striker also has a Nerf cannon with green darts, because Hasbro is addicted to Nerf, and they're chasing that dragon with fervor. Because that's what I like hanging off the wings of my TIE Fighter. Nerf darts. I also find it odd that a movie set mere hours before the original Star Wars gets TIE fighters that are completely redesigned, while The Force Awakens, set 30 years after Return of the Jedi, just has your basic TIE fighters with beefier wing connectors. Yes, I know they say the Strikers are for atmospheric operations, but let's get real. If the TIEs in Force Awakens are doing this kind of stuff, wouldn't it have made more sense to have the reinforced basic TIEs be the atmospheric TIEs in Rogue One as Scarif specials, and have the TIE Strikers show up in Force Awakens, where they could have really made a visual impact as the evolved TIE Interceptor? When it comes to Rogue One vehicles, the most controversial is the AT-ACT. According to everything I've read, the AT-ACT is supposed to be larger than the AT-ATs from The Empire Strikes Back. But what Hasbro has delivered to us is the smallest walker they've ever made, at the highest price they've ever demanded. You'll hear people saying the AT-ACT is the same size as the vintage, but that's extremely deceptive. At a glance, it might look the same size, but it isn't. And Hasbro has condemned this toy firmly in scale purgatory. The vintage AT-AT could hold 2 drivers in the cockpit. The AT-ACT, just 1, because the head isn't the same width, and a Nerf Cannon magazine occupies the rest of the space. In the middle of the AT-ACT is a large orange rectangle, which we learn through this toy is a cargo pod of sorts, theoretically capable of holding construction equipment or troops. We pull the pod out of the vehicle and open it up, and not even Jyn Erso can stand up in it. They have to stand on the open edges, and only with the pod out of the way can figures stand upright in the belly of the AT-ACT, provided you remember to lift the courtesy flaps for their heads. It's the most ridiculous design decision I've ever seen. Meanwhile, the vintage AT-AT has no issues holding a horde of troops in its cargo bay, fully standing and capable of being enclosed for transport. The AT-ACT's party trick is that it's the first figure-scale, fully automated walker in Star Wars toy history. Yes, I know, in the 80s we had the MPC Structors wind-up AT-AT, and the Galoob Action Fleet had a corded electronic walking AT-AT in the 90s, but these were miniature. The AT-ACT has an app you can download for free to connect your smartphone to the walker via Bluetooth. Then you can turn the head, fire the red LED cannons, lumber the walker forward, and fire Nerf darts. All with the accompanying sound effects. And all of this gimmickry is kinda cool, but it comes at a price. Yes, Hasbro wants $300 for this thing, but retailers aren't having it. I found this one a few days before Christmas at a Walmart for 50% off, and the toy had only been available a few days across the country at that point. If you think the deep discount so soon after release makes no sense, the idea to charge $300 for something this small with so little functionality makes even less sense. As it is, the legs are part of the automation and cannot be posed independently. The Nerf Cannon is extremely weak, sort of spitting rather than rocketing, which is bizarre given that the TIE Striker and Ewing cannons are downright dangerous. And even the Rogue One branded Nerf guns have superior velocity and range. But the big mystery is the unusable scale of the thing. See, Rogue One isn't where this behavior started. Last year for The Force Awakens, Hasbro made a new Millennium Falcon and charged $200 for it. It had a huge, stupid Nerf cannon, but was not big enough for the figures to stand up in the back when the ship was closed. The details inside the interior were scaled down too, making the figures look like giants in a Lilliputian world. As it is, it's just big enough to be expensive, but just small enough to be annoying. The mind reels. Consider The Force Awakens was the biggest movie in box office history, and the demand was there for the toys in spades. I'm pretty sure Hasbro could have sold whatever they wanted at whatever price was necessary. As you know, I'm not a modern collector, but anytime I visit a store, I go to the toy aisle. And Hasbro used to have moxie. Now they're cheaping out while demanding stupid prices. To try and understand this, I reached out to Jake Stevens, founder of FromForlomToZuckus.com, and asked him why Hasbro has been holding back on scaling the vehicles to a size that is at least the vintage equivalent. Jake told me Hasbro said it has been trying to fight rising production and labor costs the past few years. I would think if you're trying to fight production costs and labor costs, the last thing you would do is develop a technologically complex toy from scratch, as well as the proprietary software to go with it. Why didn't they just dust off the vintage version and sell it again? It's not like they haven't done it before, and it would have saved them all that time and money they took to develop this new toy. Just change the side guns, remove the chin guns, and make the middle section orange. Boom, instant toy-friendly AT-ACT, and I bet it wouldn't have been $300. Or if they were insistent on making a new toy, and they already knew it was going to be in the triple-digit price range, just make it big enough for the figures to work with properly, and tag it at $329.99 or whatever. Go big or go home. A few years ago, Hasbro really pushed the envelope with the Star Wars brand. They got away from the vintage vehicle remakes of the 90s and went all out with brand new versions of many classic trilogy vehicles. The X-Wing got bigger, the TIE's wings got bigger, Slave One got bigger, the Skywalker got taller, the Millennium Falcon was now the size of a coffee table, the Snowspeeder got, well, smaller, but that's because the vintage one was actually slightly oversized. And they made the AT-AT the size of a collie. Hasbro claims they can't make big vehicles like this anymore because of the retail prices that would be so high they wouldn't fly with buyers. They claim this Falcon would cost $500 at retail today. But when Hasbro's pushing a $300 toy out into the marketplace and collectors are willing to spend $400 for these legacy Falcons secondhand, Hasbro's explanation as to why they're pushing out $50 undersized Ewing Fighters and $200 undersized Millennium Falcons doesn't hold a lot of water. The short of it is that Hasbro used to take real risks with the Star Wars license. Even as someone who didn't collect modern, I will freely admit Hasbro demonstrated a lot of ambition there for a few years. But the elephant in the room with this video is modern Star Wars. Is it worth collecting? The answer? It's complicated. Since 1995, we've had an endless stream of Hasbro Star Wars products that by and large has just continued to eat its own tail. Hasbro Star Wars habitually consumes itself on a cyclical basis. Don't believe me? If you go over to JediBusiness.com, you'll see 18 different Farm Boy Luke Skywalkers since 1995. All of them are subtly different. Some have different accessories and poses. One even has windswept hair from a single shot in the original film. There have been 78 different Darth Vader action figures since 1995. 78! And the differences on those are sometimes so subtle, it makes the Farm Boy Luke's differences stark by comparison. You cannot chalk all of this up to making figures the kiddies want. I know that because for 7 years in the vintage Star Wars line, we had one Farm Boy Luke that you might have found with different hair colors by chance, and one, and only one, Darth Vader. Yellow lightsabers aside, the vintage Star Wars figures were very good at being definitive on the first try. I couldn't have been happier with my Bespin Luke. I didn't need one that had an action lever and another one that had 50 joints. Hey, remember that time Luke Skywalker was in his X-Wing suit, but it was for the snow? Cool, right? Remember later when he was in the same outfit, but took his gloves off for 2 seconds? Don't worry. Hasbro's got you covered there too. When you see a Han Solo in an outfit configuration that's literally from one shot in The Empire Strikes Back, you can't help but feel that Hasbro might be playing collectors for suckers. The argument I hear from modern collectors is that they're chasing the most accurate versions of the figures made, and Hasbro keeps improving them. Okay, so the details have become more intricate, but are they really more accurate? Since 1995, Hasbro has had a near allergy toward Han's Hoth outfit, refusing to put the hood up most of the time. When they finally did a super articulated version that was supposed to be definitive, they left the hood down and gave him a silly hat. Do you remember Han Solo ever riding around on Hoth looking like this? I don't. He looked like this. When they put the hood on him finally, He couldn't ride a modern Tauntaun because his legs were immobilized by his coat. So they fixed that, but took the hood off of him again. You literally have to cobble together a correct version yourself. And in these later, allegedly more detailed figures, Hasbro gave all of the Empire Strikes Back Han Solos the wrong blaster, time and time again. So you have to get a few Hoth Lukes to sacrifice to give your ESB Solos the right sidearms. Stuff like this was happening constantly throughout the Hasbro run, with little to no explanation or effort to fix it in later versions of these figures. Meanwhile, the vintage Hoth Han Solo, Kenner was able to deliver the essence of the character with no problem. The hood was up, and back then the blasters were so generically shaped, it was correct for what it was. And that's my point. Hasbro has lured collectors over the past 20 years by touting more detailed, super accurate, and then gets the stupidest stuff wrong while packaging those badly needed accurate accessories with completely different toys. Not that it matters. These Han Solos can't even hold their blasters because the handles are too small. When Hasbro launched its 6-inch Black Series, they sold it on the idea that collectors would get the most definitive, accurate figures ever offered. But the first figure out of the gate was an X-Wing pilot Luke Skywalker that had the outfit from A New Hope with weapons from The Empire Strikes Back. Hasbro face-planted immediately. That's not to say Hasbro didn't hit some home runs in the past 21 years. The Legacy Millennium Falcon is a work of art, extremely impressive in scale and features. The revised Snowspeeder is so awesome looking, it could almost pass for the studio filming miniature. Luke and his Tauntaun are so detailed, we recreated this 2010 photo of Melinda with the real thing, and I can't help but be impressed. But in some cases, Hasbro has whiffed badly. Take the Vintage Collection Slave 1. Sure, it's bigger, but it broke everything that was great about the original toy. Kenner was smart enough to know that the unconventional flight position would need a handle for kids to fly it around, and that the seat would need a ratchet to hold it in position, with the seat clip able to accommodate most Kenner figures. The Hasbro Super Slave 1 has a seat clip that cannot easily hold the Boba Fett intended for it, because the clip is too small, and Fett has all of these pouches and holsters glued to his waist. It's a boneheaded design decision. The rear ramp of the ship leads to literally nowhere, making you unable to recreate the loading of the carbonite, unlike the vintage version. And the seat swings freely in flight because there's no ratchet to hold it properly in place. Not that it's easy to hold upright anyway, as it doesn't have a handle. Did I mention the opening canopy is so weakly designed it never stays shut? Kind of a problem when gravity wants to force it open because of the flight position of the toy. So many problems that could have been avoided, but weren't. This Slave 1 is indicative of that lack of common sense that seems to crop up a lot at Hasbro. Take the AT-ACT driver for Rogue One. His main purpose is to sit in the driver's seat of the walker. So why did they immobilize his legs by covering them in a rubber ammo belt, making them next to impossible to move in a seated position? Or how about the fact that the promotion for this movie was all about X-Wing fighters, but the X-Wing they are bringing out for Rogue One doesn't open up to hold figures? Geez, Hasbro, why even bother? Go home, you're drunk. It's as if Hasbro would rather all of its prospective buyers use eBay instead of inconveniencing them. Collecting modern Star Wars has some appeal, specifically in Hasbro's devotion to having made almost every character from the original trilogy at one point or another. You don't have to settle for just Luke Skywalker in his Snowspeeder gear. You can also get Wedge, Dak, and Jansen too, if you want General Rieekan, or heck, that guy on Cloud City who runs by with the ice cream machine under his arm. Hasbro made that possible. But it's best to handpick what's most important to you if you feel tempted by modern, because ultimately, modern toys of the original trilogy weren't actually there from 1977 to 1983. These toys are temporarily disconnected from the film they're based on. They know what they are, but they don't know why. In preparation for this video, I bought toys mainly from The Empire Strikes Back, because if I had to buy modern, it was at least going to be from my favorite film. By and large, Hasbro has reproduced every single character we remember from the vintage line, but you won't be able to get the design uniformity Kenner had. With vintage, aside from vinyl versus cloth capes, the figures were all the same style, and they worked together well. The same cannot be said with Hasbro. If you're trying to collect a run in which they all share the same construction and feel like they belong together like the vintage, it won't happen. Hasbro has modified, enhanced, backtracked, and repeated themselves so many times with the construction of these figures, even main characters have been left behind. Take Lando Calrissian, a major character in an iconic outfit, but the figure is not super articulated and hence doesn't measure up to the other redone heroes. His cape doesn't even come off, but that's the closest you can get. And with the state of things today with smaller vehicles and simpler figures, it's unlikely Hasbro is going to revisit many of these figures anytime soon, despite their claims that they've relaunched the super articulated Vintage Collection line at Star Wars Celebration 2017. Imagine if all of the vintage Empire and Jedi figures had bendable knees and elbows, but the original Star Wars figures didn't. That's what you're dealing with when you collect modern. Lots of incongruities. As I said, I haven't collected modern Star Wars for a very long time. Not counting the pieces I pulled together for this video, I only had a small handful of 90s era Star Wars toys left, and it was only by chance those were still around. The most legitimate Star Wars toys in the modern era are the ones that were released day and date with the films they were based on. Those Episode 1 figures from 1999, for example, are the toys for that movie. They are connected to the Phantom Menace in the same way the vintage Star Wars toys are connected to the original movies. And the same can be said for these Rogue One figures. They are ground zero for toys connected to the release of Rogue One. And one day they will be known as the original or vintage Rogue One toys. I never buy toys before seeing the movie they're connected to ever again, because the movie could suck. Mercifully, unlike Phantom Menace, I found Rogue One to be excellent. Not without some faults, but overall, it was a lot of fun. So those toys Seth Hastings sent over were suddenly imbued with excitement and meaning, and I was compelled to find the rest of the figures from that line. Not so much the 6-inch Black Series figures. Yes, they're nice and all, and they'll look great on display in my office, but they're not the essence of Star Wars action figure collecting. That will always belong to the 3 3/4-inch scale figures where it all began. The only regret is that it's unlikely Hasbro will take the time to produce more characters from Rogue One before they gear up for The Last Jedi. So if you want characters like Tarkin, Mon Mothma, Rebel Troops, or Red and Gold Leader, you'll have to buy Hasbro's older offerings to round out the cast. While the Rogue One vehicles are full of disappointment, the action figures are near-perfect old-school style representations of characters from an amazing Star Wars movie, and they've brought me a lot of fun looking for Star Wars figures again. The vehicles, Hasbro can keep them. So by now you're probably wondering which Rogue One toy is my favorite. That's easy. It's this replica Stormtrooper helmet. I would have killed for this as a kid, and it looks really cool. The microphone inside is total junk, but the helmet itself is pretty slick. Well, there you go. So many of you over the years have asked RetroBlasting to review modern Star Wars toys. We've done it. We don't plan to do it again. So,
Move along. Move along.